My name is Mark Christensen, and this is my video modeling project for Colorado Christian University Special Education Course 580 for the spring 2018. The purpose of this presentation is for me to help a disability student, college student, to navigate and to access the services they may or may not need. The first step in this would be self-awareness. Is the student aware of his or her disability and levels of need? But most important at this point, most of them have been within special disability services for most of their lives. But at the college level, you want to see them start to exhibit a little bit more independence. So they need to know, what is their motivation for coming to class? What is their preference? Do they want intrusive or non-obtrusive assistive technology? Do they want to set aside for themselves? What are their goals? Are they auditing the course, or are they here for credit seeking? Or are they here just for the experience? Or are they here for a degree? Because that will determine their personality. Are they driven, or are they here just as an experiment to have a nice social experience or to test the waters? But how do these factors influence their judgment and their decision making? Well, absolutely, it affects them, their level of commitment to success or not success. Most of my college students that I've had over the years, because I've adjunct professored for about the last 15 years, I've found that most of my disability students would present me with their paperwork at the beginning to disclose their disability, but then after that, there would be little to no follow-up, but we'll get to that later. But anyway, can the student accurately describe their disability and the impact on the educational process as it pertains to your class that I took, that they were taking with me? I taught primarily English composition courses, so they did not have to go into the field. There was no lab work or any other aspects of the course that would probably challenge them, other than just getting content information, like writing assignments and informations back and forth between the students. So the example is a student with a visual impairment who would be legally blind would probably want to be self-aware and say, what kind of technology would I want to use? Do I want to use enhanced listening audio equipment? Do I need to use the use of an iPod? Does that make sense to have the lectures placed on that so I can read it with a magnifying scope? Do I really want to bring an electronic magnifier into the classroom? But we'll talk more about that later. So the answer is you have to ask ourselves, is the disability support staff at the college or community college adequate to support or to give technology if the student does not own that? And my answer to that is predominantly yes. Library services, IT services, and of that nature can often make audio devices and visual devices available to students who are in need. Self-advocacy, this is a difficult point to make. The student understands their rights, their federal rights and their ADA rights and state laws as far as being disclosure of the disability. And as I said, with motivation of the student, is the student motivated to be treated differently? Because oftentimes we want to mainstream disabled students and make them feel just one of the crowd. We don't want to separate them. So having them speak up is difficult. As I already mentioned, oftentimes I get paperwork at the beginning of the semester, but not hear from the student for the rest of the semester and whatnot. And sometimes a disability student who, like, for instance, our example student who had a blindness, had a seeing disability, would attend class sparingly. They would probably have maybe a third to maybe maximum half of the classes they would attend. And that was one of the accommodations made by their letter. An example is for services for those with disabilities is it isn't just the responsibility of the student to give voice, but to understand that there are 32,000 to 14,000, 7,000 different kinds of people who have disabilities, sleeping disabilities, transportation disabilities that are basically ignored. So maybe it is up to the college professor, the educational support staff, faculty, to make sure that they give voice to this. So there is no sense that the student is given preferential treatment or the student is being treated any differently than any other student. And again, this begins with the theme of my approach to disabilities is campus of culture inclusivity. That means the campus needs to be open and welcome and collaborate with the student with this assistive technologies accommodations, which I find goes beyond just having projection screens and good speakers and audio equipment and headphones available and laptops in the classroom when they attend, but also, is the campus accessible? Are there on-ramps and are there automatic doors that allow the student to access all aspects of the campus? Again, communication is paramount. Oftentimes you get a disability disclosure statement and accommodation list at the beginning of the semester, but you don't hear from them. So what can you do? Well, you have to continually check in with your students, not only the ones with disabilities, but the ones with emotional disabilities and whatnot. Always check in with them emotionally, and also make it open to them that if you have an emotional disability or a physical disability, make sure that they have the information they need to access that. Oftentimes in colleges, I understand that it's a rough point in transition in their lives. Being 18, 21, or being 26 or 30 and transitioning back to school can be difficult and depressing. So therefore, given emotional supports, most colleges have licensed clinical social workers who are more than capable of directing even the physically disabled or the emotional disabled to get the services that they need. And an example of this is where do you and how do you treat a student? Do you treat them? I mean, HIPAA laws and FERPA laws are pretty discreet. Only person that can know how they're doing academically is the student. And one aspect that HIPAA and FERPA has made for me with my disability students over the past, I don't communicate with parents and I don't communicate with service providers. I only communicate with the student, because I think one aspect of student interaction would have to be a level of independence when they go to college. So by acknowledging HIPAA and the regulations and rules at the higher education, it is important for the disabled student to exhibit a little bit a level of independence. So, and again, are the marketing and catalogs and stuff at the college, are they acceptable in digital and audio? Are they enhanced, and are they described in adequate format? For example, I always made it a part of a digital presentation at the beginning in enlarged print and everything else about these services, from emotional disorders to depression for suicide prevention to physical disabilities, and maps and as part of the syllabus. So it's always accessible to my students. Self-advocacy and leadership. We always talk about self-advocacy and leadership being a difficult thing. Sometimes the staff and faculty have to take the leadership position to help the student advocate for themselves, because oftentimes the student doesn't want to be a nuisance. The assistive technology that they do receive, if they have an electronic scoping device, they may or may not bring it. Like the legally blind student I had last semester, he brought his equipment once or twice, and then it became too clunky and too much of a disruption in class. And then he stopped using it, and his attendance did drop up and down, but I kept constructive and consistent communication with him, and he did successfully complete the course. So basically, you have to ask yourself, do you have a plan regarding assistive technology? Is it feasible? Is it workable? Or do we have an alternative plan? And usually the projection screens are important. And the only thing with projection screens that I learned, make it black and white. Don't use colors, soft tones. Most blind or visually impaired people, students cannot see that tone. And again, example, what do I need? Not just what the student needs, but what do I need as a professor to make sure that I do cover the different ways and multi-molds to communicate, and make sure that I'm giving my information not only auditorily, but given proper visual support. And am I given a proper access, like video recordings and copies and transcripts of the lectures? That's a good question. So both student and faculty should ask those questions. Do we promote inclusive campus culture? Is paramount in this relationship between faculty, staff, and disabled students and students needing assistive technology. Self-evaluation and self-determination, and this falls under, in my opinion, with open communication. Do we self-evaluate? Do we just look at the disabled list at the beginning and forget about it, or do we check in with our students throughout the semester? If I have any concerns about a student with or without a disability or an emotional disability, or someone I deem as having maybe a substance problem or anything like that, I always openly, and not inclusively or in one-to-one meetings, which I do use, but I actually just talk about it openly in the class to not make it feel differently. I talk in general terms of assistive services for people that might need emotional support for suicide prevention and or people with assistive technologies. If you suspect you have a disability, I always make it open so it doesn't seem different. So self-evaluation is always important. And then you just let the student determine. And if a student really wants to talk about it privately, always acknowledge throughout the semester, please come and see me in my office and make an appointment. And again, that goes to asking, what do I need? Do I need assistive technology? Do I need emotional support? Because even an impaired student may just need that emotional support and counseling to say, hey, you're doing fine. Understand that we want to make all these social services available to you as a student. So basically, we have to ask ourselves, do we work with students to make timely changes to assistive technology supports? Are they obtrusive? Or do they work? Yes, access to visually impaired orientation and mobility specialists and hearing specialists and emotional support is absolutely paramount in higher education. And it's also good to keep that culture of inclusivity so people feel welcome at all times. The student independently chooses the appropriate AT. Again, by talking to AT technology people in the IT department and other areas in library services and learning services are more than well versed in this. Use the professional support staff around you. Use the LCSW, the licensed clinical social worker, if you suspect a disability, because they can check into the background of the student and see if they do have a caseworker, and you can move from there, because oftentimes students feel like in college the same services provided to them as a high school student or a student in K through 12 doesn't exist anymore. So again, ask, is assistive technology a need, or is it come in a different form, or can it come from the university, or does it have to come from the old servicing provider? That stuff can be answered. Use the resources at your disposal as student and faculty. Example, am I getting what I need? Does the student have the technology not just in the classroom but outside of the classroom? So do we support integration of personal assistive technology in the classroom? Absolutely, of course. But most assistive technology can be overcome if a professor or faculty records and has copies, visual copies of their lectures that allows students inside and outside the classroom for success to be re-listen or re-watch classroom material. That's fantastic. Promoting content through auditorially enhanced speakerphone and or audio recordings work, but also having that projection screen in bold black and white letters always helps. Assistive technology and problem solving. The student identifies problems with the assistive technology is example. And from this point of view, all I want to say is that, does it reduce barriers to the student? Is the student able to interact socially? Is there on and off ramps, elevators, and to access other services? Can they go to the art gallery? Can they go to different places to participate in clubs and publishing opportunities like the student newspaper and art programs and stuff like that? It's always important to make sure the technology works. And again, it's always good to reflect for both people, the student and the impaired and the people. Is it working? The investigation to just try to validate the competency of your class, and how do you use assistive technology as a part of just reinforcing your mainstream classroom. Always having good audio and visual supports always enhances learning and allows people to feel emotionally open to learning. And if people are emotionally open, they will learn, and they'll promote a positive, inclusive environment for learning. So do we promote in collaboration among students, various support services, AT challenging services? Those are always good questions to ask. Always ask and reflect. Always ask and reflect. Make sure that the students feel comfortable that all the technology is available there. Also make sure that everything from projection bulbs are accessible. Nothing throws a classroom more into disarray than if you have a dead battery or a bulb and then you have to change your delivery. So if you have a visually impaired student and you can't use the overhead projector for a day or a week, it's always good to understand your information, your IT department. Make sure you make them know that, hey, this light bulb is burned out, and make sure they get it corrected immediately. That's about it. Again, in summation of my presentation, it's all about inclusivity and communication and making sure that you do deliver your content in a multimodal set that allows people to learn visually or auditorily, and always provide it in a timely manner, in an organized manner where they can access audio files and of that nature. Always make it abundantly clear to them in syllabus where they can access their services, but make those services available and feel available. Don't make them feel like they are at need or asking or a burden. We don't want to treat disabled students any differently than we would treat any other students, because oftentimes even mainstream students need audio or visual support to learn. And let's not ever forget about the emotional supports that all students need, and especially in the college setting. College is a time of transition for most young students, and by allowing and giving them those emotional supports will probably most likely and hopefully guarantee their success, which would be our